I never imagined a single woman with an HOA badge could decide whether I lived or died, but that afternoon proved how fragile life becomes when power mixes with ignorance. I was standing in my local pharmacy, heart racing, palms shaking, waiting for the refill. That keeps my blood pressure from spiking into stroke territory. That medication isn't optional, dramatic, or negotiable. Miss it, and my body turns against me. As the pharmacist reached under the counter, the automatic doors slammed open behind me. Enter Karen. She wore the familiar tight smile, clipboard pressed like a weapon to her chest, HOA logo shining like a sheriff's star. I recognized her instantly. For months, she'd fined me for imaginary violations, threatened liens, and sent letters written like courtroom indictments. Today, somehow she had followed me here. Her voice sliced through the pharmacy. That man is non-compliant with association rules and is trespassing in a shared commercial space. Every head turned. I tried to ignore her, focusing on my breathing. But she stepped closer, pointing at the paper bag now resting on the counter. You can't give him that. He owes outstanding HOA penalties. I'm authorized to confiscate items until he pays. Before I could speak, before the pharmacist could react, Karen grabbed the bag, ripped it open, and dumped my medication onto the floor. Bottles skittered across tile. One cracked. Pills rolled everywhere. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger but fear. My vision blurred. This wasn't property damage. This was a countdown. I dropped to one knee, scrambling to collect what I could, telling her I needed those to survive. She laughed. Actually laughed. Maybe next time you'll follow the rules, she said, grinding a heel down on a pill. That was the moment the pharmacist snapped. His hands were shaking worse than mine as he shouted for her to stop. She refused, loudly declaring her authority, threatening to shut the pharmacy down for aiding a violator. Then the pharmacist reached for the phone, and everything Karen thought she controlled began to collapse. In that suspended silence, my pulse hammered in my ears, and the room felt unbearably small. Customers whispered, a child cried, and the security camera above us blinked, quietly recording every choice she'd made. I realized this wasn't about rules or fines anymore. It was about control, spectacle, and humiliation. The pharmacist locked eyes with me, steady, professional, furious, and nodded once. He was choosing safety over intimidation. Karen kept talking, digging deeper, unaware that consequences had already started moving toward her. The sirens were not yet audible, but fate had clearly dialed the number and pressed call, without hesitation or mercy for abuse. The pharmacist's voice stayed calm as he spoke into the phone, but his eyes never left Karen. Yes, officer, he said clearly and slowly. An individual has destroyed prescription medication. The patient is at medical risk. We need assistance immediately. Karen's smile faltered for the first time. She waved her clipboard like a shield, scoffing that police resources shouldn't be wasted on HOA enforcement matters. But the room had shifted. The power she relied on no longer worked here. I was sitting on the floor now, my back against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The pharmacist crouched beside me, asking questions about symptoms, checking his watch, calculating how much time I had before things became dangerous. He told another employee to grab a blood pressure cuff and water. Karen snapped that they were enabling defiance and demanded my name be put on a blacklist. Nobody listened. When the automatic doors opened again, Karen straightened, clearly expecting allies. Instead, two uniformed officers walked in, scanning the scene, pills on the floor, a cracked bottle, me pale and shaking. The pharmacist mid-explanation. Karen rushed forward, launching into her speech about rules, violations, and her authority. One officer raised a hand. Ma'am, we'll hear from you in a moment. They listened to the pharmacist first. He explained the medication, the destruction, the risk, and the clear warning I'd given her. He pointed up at the camera. He pointed down at the crushed pill under her shoe. Karen interrupted repeatedly, her voice growing shrill, insisting HOA bylaws allowed confiscation of personal assets for unpaid fines. The second officer asked a simple question that changed everything. Are you licensed to practice medicine or pharmacy? Karen froze. No, she said, offended. Then you had no authority to interfere with prescribed medication, he replied, especially after being told it was life-sustaining. They asked me what happened. I told them everything, slowly, honestly, fighting dizziness. One officer nodded and radioed for EMS as a precaution. Karen laughed nervously, saying this was all a misunderstanding, that she'd pay for the pills. The first officer's tone hardened. This isn't about money. This is about reckless endangerment. When they asked for her ID, she hesitated. When they told her to place her hands behind her back, she lost control. She shouted about lawsuits, about knowing city officials, about ruining careers. The cuffs clicked anyway. The sound echoed louder than any siren. As they escorted her out, she finally looked at me, real fear in her eyes. Not anger, not superiority, fear. The pharmacist handed me a temporary emergency dose from the safe. Stockton said quietly, "You're going to be okay." And for the first time since she walked in, I believed him. The ambulance lights painted the pharmacy walls red and blue as the EMTs checked my vitals. My blood pressure was climbing, but not yet catastrophic. Close, though. Close enough that every person in that room understood how serious things had become. The pharmacist stayed beside me, explaining dosages, documenting the destroyed medication, already preparing reports for insurance and authorities. Karen was gone now, sitting in the back of a patrol car outside, her voice muffled, her power stripped down to nothing more than noise. As the EMT handed me the emergency dose, I swallowed it dry, hands still trembling. Relief didn't come instantly, but the edge softened. My thoughts slowed enough to notice details again. Customers whispering about what they'd just seen. One woman shaking her head saying, "That HOA lady is crazy." Another recording, through the window as officers secured evidence bags filled with shattered bottles and loose pills. One officer returned to ask follow-up questions. He explained calmly that destroying prescribed medication, after being warned of medical necessity, could elevate charges. Not just vandalism, not just harassment. This could be felony reckless endangerment, he said. Hearing those words out loud felt unreal. For months, Karen had made my life miserable with letters and threats. I never imagined it would end with that sentence. The pharmacist printed a temporary replacement prescription, his hands steady despite the chaos. He apologized repeatedly, though none of this was his fault. He told me he'd already called corporate compliance and legal. Pharmacies don't play around with patient safety. He also told me something I'll never forget. People like her rely on others being too intimidated to say no. Today, she met a hard stop. Outside, I could see Karen through the glass. Her posture had changed completely. No clipboard, no pointing, no audience, just hunched shoulders and frantic talking. When she noticed me watching, she looked away. The officer inside followed my gaze and said, "She won't be bothering you today." EMS cleared me to go home with instructions and a follow-up. As I stood, the pharmacist placed the new medication bag directly into my hands, making sure the seal was tight. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of the pills, but because of what they represented. Safety restored, dignity returned. Before I left, an officer asked if I'd be willing to provide a formal statement later. I agreed, not out of revenge but responsibility. What she did to me, she could do to someone else, someone weaker, someone alone. As the doors slid open and fresh air hit my face, the siren lights finally shut off. The danger had passed, but the story was far from over. Karen's arrest was only the beginning, not the ending she thought she controlled. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from neighbors, missed calls from unknown numbers. Even an email from the HOA management portal marked urgent. Word had traveled fast. A video recorded through the pharmacy window had already found its way onto local social media. It showed Karen being handcuffed, still arguing, still insisting she was within her rights. The comments were brutal. People weren't debating HOA rules anymore. They were asking how someone like her ever held authority in the first place. By noon, an officer called to schedule my formal statement. At the station, I laid everything out. Months of harassment, escalating fines, the threats, the way she'd followed me into the pharmacy like a hunter tracking prey. The detective listened carefully, taking notes, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "This establishes a pattern." That word mattered. Pattern. It meant this wasn't a one-off mistake. It was behavior. He explained that Karen had been charged overnight with reckless endangerment, destruction of medical property, and harassment. A judge had added a no-contact order. She was legally forbidden from approaching me, my home, or even communicating through the HOA. Hearing that felt surreal. For so long, she'd been an unavoidable presence. Now the law itself had drawn a line she couldn't cross. Back home, I noticed something else had changed. The usual HOA violation stickers on my mailbox were gone. The constant emails stopped. A certified letter arrived later that afternoon, not from Karen, but from the HOA's legal counsel. It was short, formal, and apologetic. They stated Karen had been suspended from all authority pending investigation. All fines against me were under review. Translation: damage control. The pharmacist called to check on me, which meant more than he probably realized. He told me corporate had flagged the incident as a major compliance violation, on Karen's part, not theirs. He also told me the police had collected the pharmacy footage officially. "She's done," he said quietly. "She crossed a line you don't uncross." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not perfectly, but peacefully. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next letter, the next threat, the next knock. Karen's power thrived on fear and silence. Both were gone now. But consequences don't end with arrest. They ripple outward. And as the HOA board scrambled to protect itself, Karen was about to discover that the life she'd built on, control could collapse just as violently as a bottle of pills on tile. 2 weeks later, the courtroom felt colder than the pharmacy ever did. Karen sat at the defense table. No clipboard, no smug smile, just stiff posture and tightly folded hands. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. Pharmacy security footage, witness statements, police reports, and medical documentation explaining exactly what my medication did and what could have happened without it. This wasn't dramatic storytelling anymore. It was facts, timelines, and consequences. When the pharmacist testified, his voice never wavered. He explained professional duty, patient safety, and how clearly I had told Karen the medication was life-sustaining. He described her refusal to stop, her dismissal of risk, and the moment he realized police were the only option left. The judge listened closely, occasionally glancing at Karen. Each glance seemed to shrink her further into herself. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't exaggerate. I simply told the truth. How missing doses affects my body. How fear feels when you realize someone else has decided your health is collateral damage. And how powerless I felt watching pills shatter on the floor. I finished by saying I never wanted revenge. I wanted it to stop, permanently. Karen's attorney argued misunderstanding, overreach, stress. The judge interrupted him. Stress does not justify endangering a life, she said flatly. In that moment, I knew the outcome before the gavel ever moved. Karen was convicted. The sentence included probation, mandatory community service, anger management, and most importantly, a permanent restraining order. She was also barred from holding any position of authority in an HOA or similar organization, ever. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions. I declined interviews. This wasn't about attention. It was about precedent, about showing that titles don't override humanity, and rules don't excuse cruelty. The HOA board later announced sweeping changes, including oversight reforms and an external compliance review. Translation again, they were terrified of liability. Life slowly returned to normal. My medication refills came without incident. My mailbox stayed quiet. Neighbors smiled instead of whispering. And sometimes, standing in my kitchen, I'd think about how close things came to going very differently. Karen wanted control. What she got was accountability. And if there's one reason I tell this story, it's this. Never let someone convince you their authority matters more than your life. Because the moment they cross that line, the law doesn't see a Karen or an HOA officer. It sees a danger, and it responds.